So before we get started, can we do a mic and video check there in the hearings room?
Sorry.
Okay. Hearings Officer Brooks, are you able to hear us?
I can. Can you hear and see me?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Thanks. All right, we can get started. We'll go on the record now. The time is 1 p.m. This is the hearing for Deschutes County file number 247-24839 PA and 840 ZC, which is a request by the applicant for land use approval of a comprehensive plan amendment to change the designation of the subject properties from forest to rural residential exception area. And the applicant is also requesting approval of a corresponding zone change to rezone the properties from forest use, the F2 zone, to multiple use agriculture, which is the MUA 10 zone. The application also includes a goal for exceptions request. My name is Tommy Brooks. I'm the hearings officer in this matter. Before we turn to the particulars of the hearing, I'm going to turn things over to Ms. King to describe how the participation process will work.
All right. Thank you, Hearings Officer Brooks. Everyone, good afternoon. For the record, my name's Hallie King. I'm a senior planner with the Deschutes County Planning Division. The afternoon hearing will be conducted in the following order. First, staff, myself, will explain the hearing format this afternoon and how we will move through the testimony portion of the hearing. I will then give a brief staff report presentation before moving into the testimony portion of today's hearing. The order of testimony is stipulated by Deschutes County Procedures Ordinance, Title 22, and is as follows. First, the applicant will have 30 minutes, again, to provide their testimony. Then any agencies in attendance this afternoon will have 10 minutes. Then we'll move into those that are in support of the application. Each individual will have 3 minutes testimony, and when we go through the public testimony, we'll first start with those that are here in person before moving to those that are joining us on Zoom. After those in support have testified, we'll move to those in opposition, and then any folks that are here that are neutral to the application will go afterwards. Then the applicant will have a 10-minute rebuttal. Staff will provide any closing comments if necessary. And I do want to note the hearings officer does have discretion to modify or eliminate time limits, again, at their discretion. And just for folks, we will be putting up a timer on the screen just so you can kind of keep track of your own time. And that way that's a bit more clear for you. Of course, as everyone can see, we do have both in-person participation and remote as well. When you do provide your testimony, we do ask that you state your first and last name and your mailing address. Please spell it as well. This ensures that we can capture your testimony and put you on our notification list for future hearings and/or decisions on this application. So again, those that are in person, we'll start with you first. Effectively, we'll just have folks come up one by one here to the front of the table to speak into the microphone and provide their testimony. Again, providing your first and last name as well. I do have some sheets up at the front if you are able to write down your information just in case the audio isn't able to capture it. So we've got those at the front of the table as well. And those that are joining us via Zoom, again, after those that are in person go, we'll have the folks on Zoom utilize the raise hand feature to signal to our AV staff that you would like to testify. Our AV staff will then promote you to a panelist so you can then unmute from your computer and start your testimony. For folks that are dialing in via Zoom, the raise hand function is by dialing *9 and then *6 to unmute. Oh, is there a question? Yes. So I'll go into sort of the process of this application as I provide my staff report. Thank you. Again, written testimony can also be provided this afternoon. If you'd like to hand in any written testimony, you can do that to staff at front, myself here. You can also email it to my email address, which is here on the screen, hallie.king@deschutes.org. We do ask folks, we've got a lot of public here today that would like to testify, and so we do want to ask folks to just, help us have an orderly and respectful hearing. Staff and the hearings officer are responsible to make sure, obviously, we get through all the testimony and that folks are respectful during and throughout this process. And so with that, I wanted to ask if anyone had any objections to the format of the hearing. If you're in person, feel free to raise your hand. Or if you are remote, please raise hand via Zoom. Doesn't look like we have any raised hands in person. Are there any raised hands on Zoom? Nope, no raised hands on Zoom. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Hearings Officer Brooks, who will talk a bit more about the hearings officer and hearing procedures.
All right, thank you, Ms. King. As just described, we are following the normal hearing procedures that are set forth in the county's code. I will provide sufficient opportunity for everyone to participate at the appropriate time. If you do have questions about the process, I do ask that you wait until you are called to give your testimony to ask those questions so that we can keep moving forward this afternoon. This application is being considered through a quasi-judicial process. I will consider only the factual evidence that is in the record. I will then apply those facts to any relevant provisions of the county's comprehensive plan and local and state land use regulations. The standards and applicable criteria relevant to this hearing were identified in the public notice announcing the hearing. They are also set forth in the staff report. The public notice and the staff report are posted on the county's website, and they are also available directly from staff upon request. It is important that you direct all of your testimony to the standards and applicable criteria. If you believe a criterion applies that was not listed, you may address the unlisted criterion. However, I urge you to explain why the criterion must apply and to do so with specificity so that other participants may respond and so that I can address that issue in my recommendation. The failure to raise an issue with enough detail that enables me or other participants to respond precludes your ability to appeal that issue to the Land Use Board of Appeals. Also, the failure to raise a constitutional or other issue relating to any proposed condition of approval, again, with enough detail to allow me to respond to that issue in my decision, precludes an action for damages in circuit court. As I noted, I serve as the county's hearings officer, and in that role, my job is to be a neutral decision maker. Thus, while I have a contract with the county to serve in this role, I am obligated to remain impartial, and I do not represent the county's interests or the interests of any other participant. To that end, I'll state for the record that I am not aware of any relationship with the applicant or other participants in this proceeding that would prevent me from remaining impartial. I have briefly communicated with staff, but only to discuss the particulars of today's hearing and not the substance of the application. And I do not have any ex parte contacts to disclose. Because we want to be efficient this afternoon, I want to take some time right now. Ms. King, if we can figure out how many people are signed up to testify.
Ms. Hearings Officer Brooks, we've got about 40 people in the audience. And I expect if all would like to testify this afternoon. And then it looks like we've got about 41 attendees on Zoom.
Okay. So with that in mind, as a lot of people that are potentially testifying, I am going to stick to the time limits that were described by Ms. King earlier. I'm also going to do that pretty aggressively. So if you see your time clicking up to that 3 minutes, I really encourage you to wrap up your comments at that time so that I do not have to stop you from speaking. I will do this as fairly with everyone as I can, and I ask that everyone work with us to get through what appears to be a lot of people. So before we begin, does anyone wish to challenge my ability to hear this matter or to challenge the county's jurisdiction over this matter?
There are no raised hands in the audience and none on Zoom.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we'll take the staff report.
Excellent. Thank you, Hearings Officer Brooks. Let me get my screen caught up. Here we go. Okay, let me get the screens. All right. So, as everyone I believe is aware here today, the application is for a plan amendment zone change for approximately 58 acres. I have the subject property highlighted here in red on my screen. The property is adjacent to the City of Sisters city limits and urban growth boundary on the south end. To the west, the southwest corner is Sisters High School, the sports fields, as well as the Trout Creek Conservation Tract and Conservation Area that's also under ownership by the school district with a partnership with the Deschutes Land Trust. To the northwest is the Tollgate subdivision. This is in the rural Deschutes County. It is zoned rural residential 10. And then to the east is federally owned lands as part of the Deschutes National Forest. Again, subject property about 58 acres in size, consists of 4 tax lots. This overview map is also just to put the property in context to show adjacent zoning. Again, the request to go from Forest Use 2 to MUA 10. You can see the surrounding properties are also in the forest zone, again with urban zoning within City of Sisters there to the south, and Tollgate subdivision in red is zoned rural residential 10. Again, application consists of a comprehensive plan amendment with corresponding zone change. The zone change is only to the base zone of the property, which is Forest Use 2 to MUA 10. It does not change applicable combining zones, which include the landscape management overlay. As you can see, I'm going to toggle back to this map. The northeast corners of the property are within the scenic corridor for State Highway 20. And the property is also, due to proximity to Sisters Eagle Airport, is within the airport safety combining zone. But again, this zone change application does not change those combining zones. As noted, the applicant has requested a Goal 4 exception, which is exception to statewide planning Goal 4 related to forest lands. Staff wants to note there's no physical development of the property reviewed with this application. That would require subsequent land use applications if developed in the future. Some key considerations and criteria. Again, the staff report is about 55 pages in length, includes the applicant's narrative burden of proof. Applicable local standards include Deschutes County Code Section 18136.020, which pertains to rezone of property, and that's the applicable approval criteria. And then another large component of this application is the exception request to Goal 4, which is those standards and criteria are derived straight from Oregon administrative rules and Oregon statutes. The applicant did include a soil study of the property that's also in the record, which concluded that the subject property contains primarily Class 7 soils, which are not suitable, considered not suitable for farming, as well as non-commercial or non-mercantile trees based on their growth habitat. Those were categorized as forest productivity Class 6, where Class 1 through 4 are considered mercantile or commercial tree species. I do want to note, again, as I know we'll hear today, we've gotten significant public involvement in this application. We've received both comments in support and in opposition. Those in support reference the City of Sisters ongoing UGB expansion study and project, which refer to the potential for this property to be included in the UGB. Again, that is not part of this review or this application at this time. Folks that supported also noted potential housing opportunities and adjacency to existing infrastructure and utilities as well. Those in opposition cited impacts, concerns to wildlife, sensitive plant species on the property and around, possible impacts to the Trout Creek corridor, general concerns with groundwater availability, and then growth management concerns as well. Do want to note, for the record, we did receive a comment from the City of Sisters City Council. They did not take a particular position on this application or comment on the merits of the application, but they did allude to their ongoing UGB process and how this might fit in with that process as well. And I do want to note as well, I received more public comments kind of right before this hearing. So just letting folks know, if you sent me something before 1 o'clock today or shortly before, we will get that uploaded to the record for the hearings officer to consider. As well, a couple other things I wanted to highlight for the record for the hearings officer and the public. So the applicant submitted a letter to the hearings officer on April 4th. As well as some supplementary soils letter submitted today. Those are both uploaded to the application record. And just before the hearing, we did also receive a comment from Department of Land Conservation and Development. They're the statewide planning agency, citing some, alluding to some criteria that they did not see was included in the burden of proof. So again, those are both uploaded to the record. And we'll get any other comments received as well uploaded. Just to touch on the local review process, I know I received a few questions from folks about this. So for plan amendment zone changes, there's sort of a multi-step hearings process. The first is the initial hearing with the county hearings officer, which is what we are conducting today. The hearings officer will draft a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. The Board of County Commissioners then will hold a subsequent public hearing. So effectively, we'll do this again in this same room. And there'll be opportunity for testimony and all of that. And so that date is to be determined. Again, that's going to be obviously sometime in the future. There will be public notice for that hearing. So again, folks that have participated, have given their address, mailing address, and email, you will be on our notification list. And then the Board of County Commissioners will deliberate on the application, take a vote, and then that will render the final local decision. Again, so the Board of County Commissioners are the final local decision makers. Oh, yeah. So yeah, so we had a question, and I do again want to remind folks, we can happy to answer questions. We do want to have you state that in your testimony as well, or happy to answer after the hearing. But yes, the hearings officer recommendation is public record, and that will also be mailed out to parties that have participated in. Yes. And just to remind everyone, all application materials and record materials are published at the following website here. This is provided in the notice of public hearing as well. And so if you're curious where sort of the project web pages, this is it on the screen. And we do post as timely meetings come up, we're posting when those will occur as well, and key hearing dates. And that concludes my staff report. If there's any questions from Hearings Officer Brooks, happy to answer before we move into the applicant's testimony.
Thank you. I do not have questions for staff at this time, so we can move on to the applicant's presentation.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll take one. Table?
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Hearings Officer Brooks. My name is Chris Kovac, 937 Northwest Newport Bend, Suite 220, and that's 97703. With me is the client applicant representative, Bill Willits, and he'll introduce himself because he's going to speak in support of his application. How's that? All right.
Good.
So I'll reiterate, next to me is the applicant representative, Mr. Bill Willits. He's a member of the property owner, the MMV LLC, and he will speak in support later and give his address at that point in time. So we appreciate you giving us the time today. These are important processes for the community, for the applicants, and for the county. And so we really appreciate the time and attention that you always give to these matters. I wanted to thank staff as well, Ms. King and Mr. Ripper. This is a big application. I've got all this stuff here, and I'm sure you're aware that it takes a lot to put something like this together. And we couldn't have done it without the assistance of staff, and we really appreciate that as always. So the nature of the application, I want to talk a little bit about it because as I said in my letter, it may not be as straightforward as some people have seen. It's an application to rezone property, but it does have some connection to the city process. And so you're getting comments from a lot of people that talk about urban development and the impacts of urban development on the property. And I just want to reiterate what Ms. King said is there is no development requested. And this is an application really to just put a different designation on the property. And that designation may lead to certain things in the future. It may lead to the city's ability to evaluate this property for expansion in its process. And one of the reasons we didn't think it was appropriate to include a request to expand the urban growth boundary was out of respect for that city ongoing process. And so the application really, and we've tried to be very transparent with the county and with the public, is really this will, if it's approved, it will allow the city potentially to evaluate this property for future inclusion. And if that happens, there will be a lot of process to apply a zone, to annex it, master planning, a lot of public participation. And there are a lot of great comments that will be and should be considered in those processes if they ever happen. But for today, what we really wanted to kind of hone in on, and hopefully we won't take our whole 30 minutes because we've got a lot of people here, is really what's before us today and what are the criteria we need to talk about for this application. As an initial matter, less than an hour before the hearing, we did get some comments from the state DLCD. And based on those, and maybe other comments that I haven't seen that just came in, we are going to request that the record be kept open. I know the DLCD staff has a lot on their plate. They're working really hard. I don't think they had a real good opportunity to review the material. Their letter refers to confusion over whether the application seeks to do the redesignation under a certain statute, and I looked it up, and it's a statute for re-acknowledgement, and it's a legislative process. We wouldn't be the applicant in that. So I don't know where they got that confusion, but we'd like an opportunity. Oh, and they also noted that we're seeking rural residential development, which it really isn't accurate. So we'd like the opportunity at least to respond and clarify what we think DLCD's got a little bit off in their letter. So we can talk about timing after, but that's a request we are going to make, and I didn't want to forget that. So on the application, in my letter, I tried to summarize what our application is about and what the evidence is that supports it. And it starts with the county comprehensive plan. We had to demonstrate consistency with various applicable requirements. And I tried to focus in on the main ones. And I think really largely the opponents did too. And that's kind of, how would changing this zone, no development, how would it be consistent or inconsistent with the county comprehensive plan? Well, the main elements goals 1 and 2 are really public participation. And so the fact that everybody's here today and presenting to you in an open forum, we think this process is consistent with those goals, or goal 1. Goal 2 is the resource lands, and we think that's kind of another one that's important, and I spent a lot of time on that. And we do agree, this is land that is got some trees, but what we looked at was rezoning it to MUA is not inconsistent with preserving commercial forest lands, because we have a report from a professional who, by the way, is one of the people that DLCD lists as a resource, Gary Kitzrow, and he's established that more than just soils, but he looked at soils as part of a component of productivity. And the land, unfortunately, is just not productive forest land. And so we think we checked that box off. Putting MUA 10 zone on it is not going to change its availability for productive forest use. Now, there are some other things you have to look at in the comp plan. Natural resources on the property, scenic resources, sensitive lands. I think staff did a great job of telling you that what is and what is not on the land. There are no designated resources except the creek. There are no designated scenic areas. And so, I mean, there's that little strip out along Highway 20, and there is the landscape management plan that we're not asking to be removed. But there aren't any Goal 5 resources other than the creek. Now, putting a zone on it isn't going to change that. It's not going to be inconsistent with that. And that has been the decision made in the case I cited that you presided over recently on the Park and Rec, I think it was, the surface mining one. You don't have to propose specific development with a zone change. And there's reasons why you don't. And here's a good one. We don't know if we'll ever develop it. Nobody does. If the city brings it, if the city evaluates it, if we're successful, then things could happen. But there's no guarantee that even if it's rezoned, the city will look at it the same way. It could be MUA 10 for a long time. And so just putting the zone on really isn't going to change the creek. It's not going to change wildlife habitat, sensitive species. But we did go a step further. And what I wanted to make sure it was clear is even if you were to develop this property under MUA 10, suppose it doesn't get evaluated favorably by the city. And there are a lot of comments that their city's going to hear if this property is included in that process, and some of them you've seen. So it's not a done deal. But if it's MUA 10 going forward, for example, the creek, the county zone has a 100-foot setback for all MUA 10 development, buildings and structures. So kind of to reinforce what staff said is there are processes and code provisions in place at the county now that will protect the things on the land, the resources, the habitat, the same as if it was forest land. And I guess that's our main point is if you ignore the zoning designation on it and you look at activities that can preserve and protect the wildlife resources, the habitat, the stream, anything like that, that can all be done with responsible development as the county code dictates. And there are examples of it. I pointed out one really good one is like wildlife corridors. The county's done a really good job with a lot of developments and more intense, like the R2.5 zones, the West Side Transit Zone, and some of those zones where they've allowed reasonable rural residential development and they've required designated wildlife corridors. And those exist throughout a lot of those developments. They're fairly wide swaths of land specifically set aside for wildlife corridors. And so that's a good example of how, changing this zone to MUA 10, just changing the zone isn't going to change anything. But if you did look forward and forecast what development could take place, the county code allows for protection. It allows for responsible development. And that also goes to the wildfire risk. Nobody's diminishing that, just like the creek. But my clients have no intention of ever doing anything but preserving the creek. That's a resource that everybody shares, I think, a common view that it should be protected. We may differ with people on how that can be done, but nobody disagrees it should be done. And the same thing with wildfire. I think we all agree going forward, if anything happens on this property, it should be done responsibly. Fire hardening, I think they call it, is the new kind of word. And it's a construction thing that's going on. And I know the county's talking about these maps that have been withdrawn now, as I understand it. But there are measures that are going to be put in place going forward where we all have to take responsibility and accountability for protecting each other and ourselves from wildfires. And we think that's the best time and the best avenue to do that. It shouldn't be, let's just close the door on all development or future development. And so to sum up, in our letter, in our narrative, we've gone through all of what we think are the relevant ones, the rural residential or the rural development standards, and how MUA 10, if development happens, it's consistent, because those uses are rural. You found that in prior cases. I've cited a couple court cases, or LUBA cases, where LUBA's agreed that the uses allowed under MUA 10 are rural uses. They're not urban uses. And so that kind of checks the county box. For the state box, I think the big issue is what Ms. King said is we had to take a goal 4 exception. We had to ask the county for a goal 4 exception. We have to have findings. And kind of the same analysis applies as to the county is if you put the MUA 10 zone on it, are you affecting the ability of the land to be used for forest operations? No. Mr. Kitzrow established that. Now, you have to protect the soil, the water, air resources, and some other things, recreation. Again, if you just put the MUA 10 zoning on it, you can be consistent with the goal 4, with the forest uses. The designation isn't going to affect the soils. They're bad now. Putting MUA 10 on it isn't going to make the soils any worse and isn't going to make it any better. I explained how putting a new zoning designation, to the extent that the property as zoned F2 is a part of wildlife habitat, to the extent it's a resource area, that can still be done under MUA 10. It's not inconsistent with those underlying goals of forest land. And even with development, that can be done. That consistency can be found. We have to show impacts on surrounding properties. We have to address that under the goal exception, and we've done that. Putting the zoning on it, again, isn't going to change anything, but if you forecast in the future rural development, the lowest parcelization you could get is 7.5 acres, 7.5 acres per parcel, I think, if you were to parcelize this, because you're within that proximity to the urban growth boundary. That's large acres of land. And the development that would occur under MUA 10 is going to be less intense than what you see around the forest. For example, there's a lot of people here from Tollgate. They're right around the forest. That's a more intense development than what you would see on MUA 10 if it ever developed as MUA 10. Goal 4 exception requires us to look at the long-term consequences, and we've addressed that in writing in our narrative. When you look at the long-term consequences of rezoning it, we really don't think, as I said before, that allowing that zone is really going to change the consequences from the environmental standpoint. The social, it really not going to have much of an impact. It's rural use. It's from forest to rural uses. If anything, the longer term social benefits could be if the city does get an opportunity to evaluate it. I suppose long term it could have a very significant social effect because the cities has a big need for housing, and this would be one of the properties it could consider through that public process. It's a transition zone. So we've covered I think we've covered the goal 4 exception process. We did address goal 14. I don't think it applies directly, and I know we don't have to take an exception to it. But, kind of given the unique nature of the application, how it somewhat relates to the ongoing city process, and the city has commented on it, we did explain how the urbanization policies, orderly transition to urban area, would not be negatively affected if we got the goal exception to goal 4. So we approached goal 14 in the context of goal 4, saying it's not inconsistent with goal 14. It's got a great location. It would potentially serve a need, a big need. It's got services stubbed to it. We looked at the impacts to the neighbors, even if it were urbanized in the future, it could be done responsibly, just like Mackenzie Meadows. There's streets stubbed to it. So what we wanted to do was make sure everybody was clear and we were transparent that if eventually this property is rezoned and if eventually the city considers it, nothing we're trying to do here is inconsistent with Goal 14. In fact, we think it's very consistent with Goal 14 to give the city another tool in its chest to look at. We've addressed the transportation planning rule. We have a professional transportation report from Scott Ferguson and Tarek Rawlings from the county. We did a little back and forth, which is good. It's a great part of this process with this county anyways, they're open to discussing issues and answering questions. And Mr. Ferguson worked with Mr. Rawlings to kind of make sure that the transportation planning rule analysis that we put together was exactly what the county needed to see. And so we've done that. We didn't address, and I maybe a little remiss, I didn't specifically address the airport overlay. And I didn't do that for a reason, is that we know it applies. It's a future thing if the property, a lot of things have to happen before that becomes really relevant. But I guess the point I'd like to make today is nothing that we're planning could not be accommodated under that overlay. There's a lot of development that exists closer to the airport. A lot of uses exist closer to the airport. And so there are ways to deal with that. Oh, the one thing I did want to mention, I just skipped over, I apologize, is the other thing under Goal 4 that we had to establish, and this is a big part, I can't believe I didn't remember this, is we have to show that there's other exception areas that can't reasonably accommodate the use. And that's where you get into what's the use. Well, the use is we want to have this transitionary zone available for the city. And we do think that's a valid use. There's no other definition of use that would say it's not. And we looked at, and there were comments at some public meetings with the county and the city about how the current exception lands around the city of Sisters, the county exception lands, really isn't available. And there's a number of issues, and we've got this all in our application material, giving you a bunch of maps and a lot of information. So all of the exception areas that are RR10, north and northeast, and some might be RR5, but they're all parcelized. They're already developed, most of them. There's a few spots that aren't, but most of them are highly developed, and they are developed with very valuable improvements. A lot of them have topographic constraints. A lot of them have environmental constraints. But really the biggest constraint, what we've evidenced by numerous pages here, is almost every one is restricted by private CC&Rs that were created before 2019, which means they're valid under state law. And we put them in there so you can see we're not just making this up. These are restrictive covenants that don't allow further subdivision in most instances, only allow one structure per property. And most importantly, they can't be amended unless there's a supermajority. Some of them are as high as 75, 80%. So that was a discussion between the city and the county leaders about, well, how can you use that land? How can you assure that that's going to be available for anything? Because people have to take dramatic actions to open that property up, remove valuable improvements. And then the other thing is most of them are very, very far from public utilities. And so we've demonstrated that some of them are 2,000 feet from utilities, whereas, the property we'd like to have the city have the opportunity to evaluate is right against the city. You've seen the pictures, and it's got utilities from below that go right up to it. So we believe we've accomplished the task of showing under Goal 14, and then to the extent you find Goal 14 relevant, Goal 4 and Goal 14 to the extent you find it relevant, we've shown that there are no other areas for which an exception is not needed that could satisfy the specific need that we've presented. So that's how we've addressed that. I'm kind of done with my notes. So unless you have any questions, we'll come back up and respond to some of the comments that we've read. And like I said, we're not diminishing any of them. We think they're all, they're good comments. There's things that have to be considered. I'd say the majority of them need to be considered if and when there's these future processes to bring the property, if the city wants to evaluate it, and then subsequent processes. But we'll respond as needed in rebuttal.
Okay. I do have questions for you. Does that conclude the applicant's presentation or?
Yes,
is there?
it does. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. That's very descriptive and helps me put some context to the application. Some of the questions I had, I think you have already started to address. So the first one I wanted to ask you about was the goal 14. It sounds like, and maybe you can just confirm this, that it is you do not have to get a goal 14 exception. You have done this more as kind of a belt and suspenders and sort of acknowledge the role that it's going to play potentially with the city. But I just want to confirm that that is kind of the official stance, that that is not something we need to address.
Yeah, that is correct. The regulations say if you seek a UGB amendment, you have to do it, exception to goal 14, or if you propose urban uses. And MUA 10, as I said, you found is not an urban use. So we don't need it. It is a belt and suspenders. And I think it's important information to the extent you want to consider it, but I don't think you have to.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. You did your comments in this just now, you were getting to another question. You anticipated what I had was sort of, what is the use? I fully understand that there's not a specific development being proposed. And let me give you a little context for why I asked the question. I think it has to do with these goal exception criteria and, for example, showing that those alternative areas cannot reasonably accommodate, quote, the use. I'm not saying that you can't get a goal exception without identifying a specific use, but I think it's easier to analyze it when there is. And another example would be showing that the use is compatible with surrounding natural resources. So can you help refine my understanding of what the actual proposed use is that's going to run through these goal exception criteria?
Well, it's twofold. One is we do think it's a valid use to say we want this property available for consideration in the city process. But also, if you look at the MUA property, all of the other exception property is not MUA 10. So there are uses in MUA 10 that can't be made on those properties for the same reasons, right? So I can't go in if I owned this MUA 10 and I went in and I said, well, I want to develop some MUA 10 uses. I want to create a 6-lot subdivision for residential. I couldn't do that on these other properties. They're already parcelized. And so I think that's another way to look at it. And that's why we tried to go through, even though we're not asking for specific development, what we try to do is explain in more of a theoretical way how the uses allowed under MUA 10 are consistent with the goal for resource objectives. But you were asked a good question, which is, what's the use? Well, there are many uses under MUA 10, and if you apply our analysis, can they be done on exception areas that are already taken? Well, I would say no, not really, because all these subdivisions already have expensive homes on it, and you can't really go in and create new MUA 10 uses without taking down these valuable improvements. And we just don't think that that's a reasonable assumption to make, that people are going to do that. So even if you look at the uses that are allowed under MUA 10, we think we've qualified for the goal exception, looking at it from that lens as well.
And then to sort of pick up on that, is it something more narrow than that where is it, I heard you say that the proposed use is really to provide a transition zone to urban development. Is it specific to a transition zone for the City of Sisters, or do I need to ask questions about other transition zones around the county since I'm applying the sort of the county code and a county exception here?
I look at it just through the lens of Deschutes County, because what we were told when we came in for pre-apps and whatever is MUA 10 is a Deschutes County transition zone. And so whenever you want to rezone property for future more intense development, and I would note, this isn't unique in Deschutes County. On the east side, you probably have heard some cases where there's a lot of this going on with EFU land, where people don't propose any specific uses. They propose MUA 10 because it is a very good transition zone from rural to eventually to urban, but a lot has to happen. And so our application is directed at Deschutes County's view of a transition zone and what it's done in the past with MUA 10.
Sort of sticking with the goal exception criteria here, the administrative rule that I think is you focus on the most in the application and that's in the staff report is 660-004-0020. That's kind of like the generic goal exception criteria. The way I read that though, it's kind of the second step in the process. That rule also refers to 660-004-0022, and that's sort of the need component of the goal exception. I haven't thought about before whether or not that absolutely has to apply, but I could, if you don't know it now, since you're asking to keep the record open, it would be helpful, I think, to know if 004-0022 is applicable. If it's not, sort of what the legal argument for why it's not. If it is, how you've addressed it in the and it sounds like maybe based on, I haven't read the DLCD letter yet, but it sounds like based on your characterization of that, they may be asking a slightly similar question because I think that rural residential component is a specific piece of that. So anyway, if that's something you can address now, I'd love to hear it. If not, I would like to, have some information about that rule to be able to know how that's getting implemented.
Well, my explanation would be fairly long, and since we're running short on time and we've already requested the record to be open, I think I'd prefer to just give you written information on that.
Fair enough. No, I appreciate that. And then last, and this is sort of moving back to the county code and the zone change. The criteria for a zone change. I don't want to overthink it too much. I think you described in your submittal that you're not really saying there was an error made. There's some broad changes in circumstances, but sequentially the plan amendment would come first and then the zone change. Is it easy enough just to say that the plan amendment itself, if approved and the goal exception is approved, that's enough of a change circumstance to then go do a zone change that comports with that? Or do I need to address these broader, change in circumstances about, that increased pressure on sisters development and other things?
Now, that's an interesting question. I think the comp plan change alone would be a change in circumstances that would facilitate a zone change, because I've always, 30 years doing this, I always knew there were two ways to get a zone change. If you're changing to be consistent with the comp plan, you really had an easier path. If you were changing different, if you sought a zone change that wasn't consistent, you had a harder path. So I think that would be a change in circumstance that would affect how the zone change was processed from that point on.
Thank you. I think that's all the questions I have for the applicant. Of course, you'll have rebuttal time, and it sounds like we'll be keeping the record open. So I appreciate your time.
Great. I appreciate your time as well. Thank you. You have to sit down and then come back? Okay.
Ms. King, it sounds like there may be, or I guess, are there agencies that have signed up to provide testimony before we get to the rest of it, or?
Yeah, let's see. So again, if there's any public agencies in the room or on Zoom, please raise your hand. I don't see no raised hands in the room, and doesn't look like there's any on Zoom. So it doesn't appear there's any agencies. So we can move into the support.
Okay, let's do
Public
that.
testimony. Thank you.
Call the first person up.
So if there's anyone that would like to testify in person in support of the application, you may come up.
Talking to this.
Yes, please. Yeah, please, as a reminder, first and last name. Yeah, so all testimony should be addressed to the hearings officer. Yep. And as a reminder, folks, please state your first and last name and mailing address for the record. Thank
And
you.
before you get started, sorry to, sort of doing some math here, if all 80 people are going to be providing testimony today, we're going to be here for at least 4 hours if everyone sticks to the 3 minutes. Couple things we can do to keep it moving. One is, like I said in my opening comments, I really ask everyone to stick to the 3 minutes, and that's why the timer will be visible and you'll be able to see that. Second, you heard from the applicant that they want to keep the record open. So if you feel rushed and that you're not able to make all your points, you will have the opportunity to provide written comments as well. I can tell you that the difference between written comments and oral comments is nothing. The information will be the same, and they both carry the same weight in my recommendation. The other thing is, if we get a lot of people giving the same testimony over and over, you are free to just say that you agree with the person that came before you or that you heard earlier. Again, the number of people that make the same point is not relevant. The only thing that's relevant are the criteria. So you can help us smooth that along. And this goes for whether you're in support of the application or in opposition to it. And the final point is really just to address the criteria. I do understand, based on the written comments I've read, there's a lot of focus on what the city's decision might be, but this really is a county decision with county and state criteria. So the more you can stick to those criteria, the more weight your comments are going to have. So with that, please proceed.
Wow. That's a lot more, that's almost attorney talk there. My name is Kurt Kahlberg. Post Office Box 3500, Sisters, Oregon. I've been in Sisters for almost 50 years. I'm the only one that's ever lived on Mackenzie Ranch, Mackenzie Meadow. I built the house, built the barn, built the fences, raised my horses. Mackenzie Meadow, to give you a little bit of history, is owned by three families: the Reed family, the Willits family, and the Kahlberg family. To make a long story short, those three families have done an awful lot for the town of Sisters. It's probably why most of these people are here. Mackenzie Meadow, Tollgate, Cascade Meadow were all developed by a company called Brooks Scanlon. Became Brooks Resources, and it was a logging company. They clear cut Tollgate, they clear cut most of Cascade Meadow Ranch and Mackenzie Meadow. They thinned it out, took all the big trees, left the little ones to come back. They cleared out Tollgate for one reason: views of the mountain so they could sell lots. Well, 50 years later, it's growing back up. I went in there last week for the first time for many years. I couldn't believe it. So to make a long story short, Mackenzie Meadow is privately owned. It's not public land. It's not Forest Service. It doesn't belong to Tollgate. It's owned by three families. It's private. When people walk on it, walk their dogs, ride their bikes, walk down my driveways, they're trespassing. Believe it or not, I went in there last week. As a neighbor, as the Tollgate neighbors, we got 10 movements. We got 2 new families that are living in the Forest Service right next to Tollgate. On behalf of Greg, I always miss his last name, but he brought up a good point in the nugget to the letter to the nugget that, go out on Mackenzie Meadow, take a look at it, break the law, trespass, and see what you think. I talked to the sheriff about it. He said the next time we'll arrest them. They will be cited. Hated to do that, but it's the only way we can protect that ground. It's my yard, no different than your yard in Tollgate. Sorry. Many years long, we got along real good. But does that mean my time's up?
That's your time, Mr. Colbert.
Just part of this.
Thank you for your comments.
Yeah. How much time am I up?
You're up.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I look forward to talking to you again. Real anxious to hear what you got to say. But as your neighbor, you're wrong. So thank you. The music, I think.
No, it's on.
It's on
Middle of
the
the
screen.
screen.
Oh, I didn't see it. Is it on which screen here?
Yes.
So folks, yep, we've got
Oh,
the
you got
clock
the-
running. Yes, yeah,
Sorry.
It's crazy.
Oh, put your name on the.
Oh,
yeah.
well,
I can't see, the clock.
Yeah, so hearings officer Brooks and I can prompt folks when it's getting close to their time finishing up, okay? Yeah. So again, we're calling testimony for those in support of the application. Are there any more in the room that would like to testify in support? Okay, and for folks on Zoom, please utilize the raise hand feature if you would like to testify in support. All right, and our AV team will elevate you to a panelist. Looks like we've got someone with a raised hand. All right, and okay.
You can proceed.
Thank you, Hearings Officer Brooks. My name is Morgan Greenwood. I am a resident of the City of Sisters and sit on the UGB Stakeholder Committee in a resident capacity. I'm also a neighbor of the subject property. Actually, my home is visible in the aerial photo demonstrated in the staff report there. I am just here to note today that like all of its neighbors in Central Oregon, Sisters is experiencing a severe housing crisis. I strongly believe that it is crucial that to best facilitate the development of our badly needed housing, the city must be able to evaluate the most ideal UGB expansion site alternatives. With the support of the UGB Stakeholder Committee, Sisters City Council sent a letter to Deschutes County regarding this application and noted that, quote, the subject parcels score well in our latest objective analysis against the required review factors as a UGB expansion. I want to just note that the parcel size, sole ownership, adjacency to existing infrastructure, proximity to existing schools, parks, and commercial amenities, and its adjacent location to the existing Sisters UGB make these parcels very worthy of serious consideration in the city's UGB expansion process. The nature of our housing crisis makes it imperative that we do this UGB expansion process right the first time. The current expansion areas present a significant challenge to future development due to multiple ownership of small parcels in county subdivisions with septic systems necessary to decommission, highly restrictive CC&Rs, and there are challenges to building new infrastructure due to topography. As a result, there is a serious risk that these lands cannot be developed in a timely manner. Due to the precarity of our housing need, we simply don't have the time to learn this the hard way and go through a costly and time-consuming land swap and UGB amendment in only 5 or 10 years. We have neighbors in Oregon, cities of Roseburg and Monmouth, who are going through a UGB land swap currently. These have taken years in both instances, and both jurisdictions are currently seeking to finalize their land swap through the legislative process, which is a challenge and a time-consuming process that Sisters simply does not have. For these reasons, I reiterate my support for the McKenzie Meadows Village LLC Comprehensive Plan Amendment and Zone Change. Thank you very much for your consideration and your service to Deschutes County.
Thank you for your time.
Again, any others on Zoom that would like to testify in support? I do not see any more raised hands. So that appears to conclude the support testimony.
Right, call it the first person in opposition to the application.
So again, in person, folks that are in opposition, you can feel free to come to the table as you would like to provide testimony. Thank you.
My name is William Carmichael. I live at 1610 West Williamson Avenue in Sisters, Oregon. And I want to call attention to the fact that this is step one to what is clearly a two-step process. Even in the letter from the attorney that was sent in, they said that the purpose of this request ultimately intends to develop a needing housing residential development with 30% dwelling in affordable housing. I also want to point out the fact that affordable housing in Sisters is, if not a joke, it's quite misleading. As an example, right now we have, as of March 18th, 2025, the apartment guide .com states that in Sisters, there are 188 apartment vacancies for rent, and some of these have been on the market for 250 days. The 188 does not include even additional ones that are currently being developed. My position is that we don't need an urban growth boundary until Sisters figures out what it's going to do. Affordable housing is a joke right now because, for example, if you take the one bedroom or a studio, it rents for $1,350 a month for an average 535 square foot apartment. A person that stays within the 30% income paid for housing would need to make about $4,660 per month. That averages out to a job of $24.50 per hour for a 48-hour, 6-day work week. But most of the work that's needed, especially the housing that we need for the service employees like service industry, restaurants, retail shops, construction, housekeeping, grocery clerks. This goes from about $13.50 up to $18.50 an hour, which isn't even close to what they can rent a $1,350 per month studio apartment. You add to that the teacher issue that we don't have housing for teachers. If you spread out the teachers' salaries currently, especially new teachers coming in, their hourly wage for an elementary teacher is $19.68 per hour. High school teachers is even less, $18.56. If they have a family, they might need 2 or 3 bedrooms. What's renting now in these apartments is $2,600 or $2,700 for a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment. If you try to rent a house in Sisters, it's over $3,000 a month for some of those. It's a big mistake for the city to move ahead with urban growth boundary expansion until there's further discussion about Sisters and maybe even the entire Deschutes County of what we're going to do. We're not even considering the adequacy.
Sorry to cut you off.
We improve the infrastructure for this. So my point is, and I know I'm over time now, my point is we are anti-urban growth boundary, many of us, until some of these other problems are solved. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Hearings Officer Brooks. Before I begin, I have some written comments I'd like to hand to staff, if that's okay. And hopefully we can pause the clock while I do that. Thank you. Okay, thank you. For the record, my name is Rory Isbell. I'm a staff attorney with Central Oregon Land Watch. Our address is 2843 Northwest Lolo Drive, Suite 200, Bend, Oregon 97703. Thank you for hearing public testimony on this application today, Hearings Officer. Land Watch is opposed to it. As we've heard, the purpose of this application is to rezone the subject property so it can be added to the Sisters UGB and be urbanized. That's taken straight out of the application. Doing that is really counter to some of the basic frameworks of Oregon land use planning, which of course protect farm and forest zoned lands like the subject property for those uses and make them last priority for an inclusion in an urban growth boundary. The application here does appear to seek an exception to Goal 4. We do not believe it meets the criteria for that exception. It seems the main brunt of the argument in favor of that exception in the application is related to Goal 14. What that really boils down to is an argument that there's a market demand for housing to justify this goal exception. That reasoning has been expressly disallowed to qualify for reasons exception in cases before, and in my written comments, I cite some of the Luba case law that stands for that proposition. The letter from DLCD that I got a chance to take a quick look at seems to back that up. DLCD agrees that reasons related to Goal 10 housing and Goal 14 urbanization do not justify an exception to a resource goal. As I heard some discussion between yourself and the applicant, we also noticed that this application does not address several of the applicable criteria related to goal exceptions, especially the OAR 660-004-0022 criteria. In my last minute here, I want to point out that we don't believe this application complies with Goal 5 either. There are 2 significant inventory Goal 5 resources on the site. Scenic views areas and riparian areas with Trout Creek running through. As such, the application needs to, but does not apply Goal 5 and go through the Goal 5 process. This application would introduce new conflicting uses to those 2 Goal 5 resources. Finally, Goal 14. Either way you cut it, we don't believe this application complies with Goal 14. If it's proposing urban use of rural land, then it needs an exception to Goal 14, but does not seek one. And even if it's proposing development allowed in the county's MUA zone, we also believe an exception to Goal 14 would be required then. That zone allows this close to a UGB up to a 12-unit subdivision of rural housing, which would frustrate the purpose of an urban growth boundary requiring a goal exception. So again, we have a lot of more detailed written comments that I've submitted into the record. Thank you for the time today.
Thank you, Mr. Edwell.
Hello, my name is Christina Meyer. I live at 69249 Lariat in Tollgate. I'm also the chair of our Firewise committee. First, I wanted to thank the applicant for being transparent about his ultimate goal to develop these parcels into housing under the banner of solving the so-called housing crisis. But let's be clear, Sisters does not have a housing crisis. We have an affordability crisis. And even more urgently, we have a looming wildfire crisis. Last June, Tollgate experienced a frightening house fire late on a Friday afternoon. Within 20 minutes, the home was a total loss. We were fortunate. The Sisters Camp Sherman Fire Department responded quickly and the fire did not spread. Afterward, Firewise hosted a debrief with the fire department and we learned just how close we came to disaster. They considered Tollgate, which is embedded in the forest, to be very high risk. Had that fire occurred on a typical hot, windy August day, it could have created a fast-moving ember storm, jumping from structure to structure, endangering not just Tollgate, but all of Sisters. Fire officials told us, you were very, very lucky this time. And the Deschutes County Forester told me our biggest threat in Tollgate is not from wildfire, it's from a house fire. And the density that's been described in his application would mean that there would be at least 9 times denser than the Tollgate community is at present. Even if built with fire-resistant materials, 430 new homes placed only 10 feet apart are vulnerable to radiant heat and ember ignition. Hayden Homes, Mackenzie Meadows neighborhood was built with only 5-foot setbacks. The surrounding wood fences, bark mulch, and shrubs provide ideal fuel. Fires in such conditions can wipe out entire blocks within minutes, just as we saw in the recent California fires. Fire Chief Tony Pryor told the Nugget in January that in a wildfire scenario, his department could fight 2, maybe 3 structure fires at once. That's it. This development, if it were allowed to complete all 58 acres, Tollgate would lose its emergency vehicle entrance, which is along the north side. Our well and our aquifer, which serve 440 homes, may be jeopardized. Tollgate has no water reservoir, and our hydrants aren't rated for firefighting. The development would be surrounded on 3 sides by forest, and add in the nearby homeless encampments, and we have a powder keg. How would 400 new families evacuate safely via just North Reed Street and McKinney Ranch Road? And do we even need this? Today, as we've heard before, there's over 100, 200 rentals and homes listed in the Central Sisters area. Sisters do not have a housing crisis. We have an affordability crisis, and a wildfire crisis we ignore at our peril. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments.
Hi, my name is Sharon Booth, 69453 Lasso in Sisters, that is in the Tollgate community. And I want to take just a moment to reiterate that even though the first legal representative said this is only a rezoning request and that the said 58 acres may never be developed, many of us in the room doubt the veracity of that statement. Even the developer has stated in his application for rezone that he intends for these 58 acres to be developed for the benefit of the UGB goals, which then becomes a moneymaker for the developer. It's also disingenuous for the owner of the 58 acres to claim that Tollgate already has bad neighbors in the forest dwellers. So, okay, why not have a bunch more bad neighbors? It's very misleading to me and hard to understand. Anyway, I have 2 points to make as to why the proposed zoning change is a poor choice. Number one, the proposed zoning change would eventually allow high-density housing immediately adjacent to Trout Creek Conservation Area. That is, they share a boundary. And the conservation area protects several species of birds of concern, as well as a quite rare flowering plant called Pex penstemon. The loss of these 50 acres of forest habitat will likely harm these threatened species greatly. The plants, birds, and large mammals such as deer do not recognize boundary lines for the preserve and versus private land, and they flow freely back and forth from there into the 58 acres of F2 forest. So even though the preserve still will exist, the surrounding habitat to the east will be wiped out. If the forest is clear-cut for construction, the birds and plants of the preserve will have their current territory reduced by at least 30% and will likely decline in population. Once that happens, there is no going back. Also, the Sisters community has always prioritized preservation of natural resources, especially for those that promote outdoor recreation, accessible to all. There's a well-used 3/4 mile walking cycling path through the preserve, currently in a quiet forest alive with birds and healthy native trees and shrubs. The preserve is also an outdoor laboratory for the biology students at the high school next door. The Sisters School District saw the educational value of this land in 1997 and prioritized protecting its 161 acres. I will allow another speaker to address the potential damage to Trout Creek and the important role it plays in the ecosystem.
Thank you, Ms. Booth.
Good afternoon. My name is Teresa Shader. I live at 20846 Solstice Drive, Bend, Oregon. As a Deschutes County resident, I'm concerned about the wildfire risk planning throughout the county as I experienced the mile marker 132 wildfire north of Bend within 2 miles of my home this past summer. Given the location of this property so close to high-density area and the wildfire threat to Sisters, why wouldn't this property be considered as a buffer similar to the west side transit zone on the west side of Bend approved by the county on April 16th, 2019? The Board of County Commissioners approved an applicant-initiated comprehensive plan and zoning text amendment, as well as a zone change of 717 acres of land from urban area reserve and surface mine to new west side transit zone, allowing for lower density, fire-resistant building for 187 homes. That's one home for every 3.8 acres. With this precedent set by this approval, with 58 acres in Sisters, that would equate to 15 fire-resistant homes, many fewer than the 433 proposed. This would certainly not fulfill the need for more affordable housing, however. That is why ultimately I am encouraging more wildfire buffer solutions and not rezoning this land from forest to MUA 10 to later be included in the urban growth boundary, and encouraging development in current urban growth boundary land to include affordable housing. Thank you for your consideration in this manner and continued creative solutions on protection from wildfires.
Thank you for your comments.
My name is Martha Lussenhop, and I live near Sisters at 69915 Meadowview Road, 97759. I'm shortening my testimony considerably because it's been so well expressed by Sharon Booth and others. But I do want to say that I am worrying about how the impact of building 433 units or dwellings on 58 acres could affect critical habitat on the adjacent Trout Creek Conservation Area, or TCCA. TCCA provides key habitat for the Pex penstemon that grows on that adjacent, the subject property also. It's a rare, ecologically sensitive plant that grows only in a small part of Central Oregon. Here's a poster of Pex penstemon with black butte in the background. This rare plant is a local treasure and should be protected from extinction. TCCA is used for biological research, as has been said, by students in the Sisters School District. I have mentored high school students as they identify native plants, count species in designated areas, and compare data with previous year's studies. My late husband was a professor of forest ecology in the Chicago area, and he would have been so delighted that students could have such an outdoor classroom. And finally, just to point out that the TCCA is owned by the Sisters School District, but is preserved through an agreement with the Deschutes Land Trust, whose mission is, and I quote, to conserve and care for the lands and water that sustain Central Oregon so local communities and the natural world can flourish together for generations to come. Increased development of houses near the Trout Creek Conservation Area would put a lot of pressure on wildlife and the fragile forest habitat. I'm hoping and expecting that a better use of the 58-acre parcel could be created with the current designation of Forest Use 2 zone. It could be a wonderful permanent open space with its ephemeral creek, a rare penstemon, and wildlife habitat where people too can enjoy peace and beauty. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lessenhop.
Hi, my name is Sally Miller. I reside at 980 Northwest T Court, Redmond, Oregon, 97756. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to voice my concerns regarding the rezoning of land referred to as Trout Creek Mackenzie Meadow Parcel One of my biggest concerns with this Forest 2 zone land being redesignated in preparation to have it developed into 433 housing units is it is located in the wildland urban interface. According to the Oregon statewide wildfire hazard map, the subject property has a wildfire hazard value of 0.121, correlating to only 9% of properties in Oregon having a higher hazard value. From 1980s through 2010s, the state experienced 500 million in insured losses from wildfire. So far in the 2020s, there has been $3 billion in wildfire insured losses. In January of this year, Andrew Stolfi, State Insurance Commissioner, reported that residents are seeing double-digit insurance premium increases. There is ample anecdotal evidence of people and sisters being canceled by Farmers and Allstate and having to find insurance. The developer is to be commended for their commitment to affordable housing. I was a credit repair counselor for Monroe County, New York's first-time homebuyer program for 7 years. I understand the transformative nature of becoming a homeowner. I also understand that this group budgets in a way that people living in a lot of Deschutes County don't seem to understand. Their money is tight. They'll be highly mortgaged. A significant increase in insurance costs could easily take an affordable home and make it one difficult to afford. The emphasis on affordability will also mean the density will be extremely high, making it very difficult to keep fire from spreading home to home, as we saw a few months ago in California. When Mr. Stolfi was asked if Oregon was going to lose insurance companies the way California has, he replied, no, because we are stringent in our urban growth boundary and limitations. Stolfi went on to say that Oregon is taking a three-prong approach. 1, restoring and maintaining resilient landscapes. 2, create more fire-adapted communities. And 3, safe and effective wildfire response. Building on land with a seasonal stream on it seems to contradict number 1. And due to what is happening nationally with the NFS, wildfire prevention has become more difficult. Wet season fire mitigation by controlled burning is being reduced due to the laying off of probationary employees. I do not believe this land should be rezoned to later be included in the UGB. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Before I start, I have a question. I'd like to know why the Planning Commission step isn't part of this process, why this goes right to the county commissioners.
Yeah, so I can address in staff closing comments, I can kind of recap the procedures and process for the application.
Okay, thanks. Just curious. My name is Monica Thomasy. I live at 527 South Fur Street in downtown Sisters. The Eastern Cascades forest ecosystems have experienced increased drought since the early 1990s. The likelihood of wildfire is predicted to increase. Yet in recent years, the border development on the west side of Sisters has encroached further west into these drying forested areas. No scientific information will show that it was or is wise to allow development within the drying forest landscapes on the west side of Sisters. I was a research program leader in the U.S. Forest Service in Washington, D.C. A great deal of research on wildfire risk prevention, adaptation, and resilience was produced over the last 30 years. A large body of knowledge is available on the wildland interface and the relevance of permanent, seasonal, and intermittent wet ecosystems to wildfire. Wet and moist areas prevent and minimize the spread of wildfire, reduce the severity of the fire, and the of the wildlife and vegetation, allowing post-fire recovery. When vegetation in moist areas is replaced with houses, more fear for wildfire is created. The loss of lives and homes are the price to be paid for that degradation. Residents of Sisters are fortunate to have the protection of the Trout Creek watershed. 56-acre Trout Creek Mackenzie Miller parcel that's the subject of today sits in this Trout Creek watershed and holds a seasonal flowing stream contrary to the application statement. Due to topography, hydrology, and vegetation, the watershed will hold more moisture than the surrounding areas. The moisture in the ground and the microclimate provides the surrounding areas with lower wildfire risk. The outcry against rezoning parcel and adding it to the UGB is not to be construed as opposition to affordable housing. We know people who work in Sisters and live in vans and trailers. We want them to have decent shelter. Over the last 7 years, we've heard from developers and city officials claiming they need help with the affordable housing crisis, only to experience administrative shell games, more private equity invested short-term rentals, and a lot of unaffordable housing. Challenging developers and some government officials that their help is laughable and cruel. Whereas with this owner's application and their own use, and the city's request, which is confusing, spelled out in my 5-page written testimony, tells me we can't trust this effort either. Any ecologist will tell you the responsible thing to do here is to sustain the ecological processes on this site. It's up to the county to make the wise choice. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Hello, my name is Eileen Hawes. I live at 9439 17th Lane in Terrebonne, Oregon. And I have been in Deschutes County since 1990. And I have found, and I've been a 30-year home health nurse, so I've gone all over this county from one end to the other. And it has been very clear to me that people come to our area to be closer to nature and our natural surroundings, not to where developers are building and reducing recreational lands. And at this time, Deschutes County continues to grow and our resources are being overwhelmed. We have had people come to this county and lie to the commissioners about what they're going to do. Say it's public land and then it's private land. And they don't get they lie to get what they want. And we can't keep doing this. We have areas in this county that are gems, and we can't give away our gems. These are places for our children to learn about forest and science, for our children to enjoy, to keep as resources that everybody can use. This piece of property, the Trout Creek Mackenzie Meadows, is one of those gems, and it has a stream flowing through it. The best we can do is protect this property for education and beauty. The property is currently designated as Forest 2. Statements regarding the UGB say that forest is best to save, and so is a stream that is part of it. Please do not change the designation of this 58 acres. It deserves to be a forest, period. I can't even fathom that they want to put houses in there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Haas.
Good afternoon. My name is Paul Twelker, Twelker. I live at 1620 West Williamson Avenue in Sisters. I commend the writers of this application. The money they spent just on the application fee alone shows how they have a charitable heart in giving something to the City of Sisters eventually. It is a rezoned property. But you know, it irks me that the entire application is speaking to urbanization. So we know the intent. And the one thing that bothers me is that they state that the land that is used to solve the housing shortage must have certain characteristics. And number 2 characteristic is no streams or wetlands. Yet in the application, it says, there are no rivers, streams, or wetlands on the property. That's on page 33. That's in the burden of proof. If you walk through the property, guess what you'll find? This is what you'll find. On this particular picture, you can see it. Here's the stream and flood. So it's quite wide that I can't even walk across it there. Now, I searched the burden of proof for any reference of Trout Creek, and there, as far as I can tell, there is none, not one mention, or there is a token mention of a conservation area owned by the school district. It's not even named. Now, I think that's a very important thing to do. Name a creek and acknowledge that it's there. So my question is, why is that obscured? Why is there no mention of not even the creek? Because it's responsible for a rare ecological system. And I'm going to leave it at that. I was a professor. I read thousands of papers. And I have to admit that this paper gets an A, but it's for obscuring what's going on that property.
Thank you, Mr. Twelger.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to comment. My name is Allison Scholl, and I'm a homeowner whose property borders the National Forest near the proposed rezoning site. I strongly oppose Mackenzie Meadow Village proposal to rezone this 58-acre parcel from Forest Use 2 to Multiple Use Agricultural, or MUA 10, because the proposal fails to meet the standards outlined in Deschutes County's comprehensive plan. The applicant claims the property lacks productivity and environmental value, but this land supports Trout Creek as well as native species and established mule deer migration routes. Fragmenting it would violate Goal 2.6, which calls on us to maintain and enhance wildlife habitat diversity. They also claim there are no scenic values on this property, despite it being part of the visual and ecological character of Sisters. That contradicts Goal 2.7, which prioritizes the protection of scenic views and natural separation between communities. The proposal further admits tree loss and increased impervious surface, suggesting that mitigation through street trees is sufficient. That directly undermines Goal 2.9, which emphasizes sustainability and maintaining environmental quality. Rezoning this land to MUA 10 would introduce rural commercial and agricultural uses that are incompatible with the surrounding forest and community context. This directly conflicts with Goal 2.3, which supports retaining Forest 2 designation for lands that may not be commercially viable for timber, but are ecologically significant. The applicant also references Goal 14, describing their urbanization analysis as a belt and suspenders approach. But if this rezone truly aligned with the land's character, it wouldn't require suspenders. The proposal invokes urban planning logic without requesting a UGB expansion, bypassing the process meant to guide responsible urban growth. That's not an orderly transition from rural to urban use. It's an attempt to justify sprawl without public review. The transportation access concerns further highlights this issue. The only access to the property via McKinney Ranch Road that my home sits on, West Williamson, creates great impact. The original traffic study failed to comply with the transportation planning rule and was revised only after county staff raised concerns. Even now, it lacks clear demonstrated readiness or safe infrastructure to support additional development. The application fails to meet the criteria for redesigning this land. It conflicts with at least 6 distinct goals in the Deschutes County Comprehensive Plan. Goals related to wildlife, environmental quality, forest protection, scenic views, urban growth, and transportation. The risks to habitat, watershed health, fire safety, and community planning are real, and they are irreversible. I urge you to deny this application, and I thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Michelle.
Again, folks in person in opposition who would like to testify, yep, please.
Thanks to the hearing officer and staff present. My name is James Nash. I'm a resident of Tollgate for the last 5 years. I have a letter that was published in the Nugget, written by Lori Chase. So much of it's been said before. I'm just going to submit that. But I do know one thing, that the first speaker and proponent said that this is only a attempt to rezone without any further plan. I know that to be falsehood. The letter writer was one of the Tollgate board members who saw the presentation by the owner and developing company. That does include the numbers that have been spoken of recently, the 400 and some odd units, which works out to less than a 10-foot setback per home. So that's all I want to say. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments.
How is this for volume?
Good, I can hear you.
My name is Lee Lucas. I live at 69625 Pine Ridge Drive, which is a 20-acre parcel just north of Panoramic View Estate subdivision. We're usually focused on the here and now. This is what, April 7th, 2025. Our planning horizon is plus or minus a few years. I'd like to take a step back, zoom out, and talk about a planning horizon of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. I have been a landowner in Deschutes County since 1994. I've often thought that it is somewhat arrogant on the part of a creature like me, whose lifespan is measured in decades, to claim ownership over land that has been here for thousands of years and will be here for thousands of years after I have left the scene. I think the proper frame of mind is that I am temporarily renting the land from its true owner. That comes with the responsibility of stewardship, to leave the land in better shape than I found it, for the benefit of the community of life that inhabits that land. I have great difficulty believing that replacing an established forest on 58 acres with hundreds of residences, destroying the existing ecosystem, represents good stewardship of that land. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
My name is Doug Wills. I live at 1655 West Williamson Avenue here in Sisters. I'm opposed to the request to change the F2 zoning to the multicultural and goal for exception to allow the city of Sisters to add this to the UGB. And I know part of that was you don't want to talk about the UGB. I will also tell you that about 4 pages of my program here have already been covered, so I'll just say that I agree with a lot of that. I'm not going to bore you with me going into it again. I think that one of the things we need to understand is that the owners of the Mackenzie Meadow LLC, the two that I know, Bill Willits and Kurt Kohlberg, have worked very well together with me on the previous Mackenzie Meadows development. We spent a lot of time together. They were straightforward. They did a great job, and I think we got along really well getting everything established. The problem was Hayden got involved, and it's right now they're will probably sell to Hayden, which goes without saying, I think. The Hayden homes will build somewhere in the neighborhood of about 400 residential units in that area. The density range for the residential district is a minimum of 3 units per gross acre, or about 174 units, to a maximum of 8 units per total of about 464 units. This is from the city code. There's currently 2 developments under construction with many homes not completed or sold. Plus, we have a glut of unfilled apartments, as you heard earlier. Do we need more? The negative impact that the gentleman brought up before, I find fault with from the standpoint that I don't recall anybody coming around and talking to any of us that are going to be directly impacted by what goes in back there. And I've not heard anybody come in and talk about it. This should be an important thought in your decision. We have about 170 communications, I think, from concerned citizens. So I thank you for your time and doing this, but just think about the people that are going to be impacted by this when you make your decision. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Hello, can you hear me? Is this good?
And yes.
My name is Eva Eagle, and I live in a rural area east of Sisters at 17212 Pine Drive. I'm currently the president of OLAWA, an organization known as Oregon Land and Water Alliance, and we're a 501c3, and we monitor a lot of land use issues and issues related to fish and wildlife. And I've been authorized to provide testimony on behalf of the board. There is a written document that I've submitted, so I'll not go into all of that. But I do want to address a couple of points. We do oppose this request, and we oppose it on a number of grounds. I was going to talk about the Goal 4 issues on the FU to MUA, and I think, that really people ahead of me have been poetic and expressed some of that very well. What I want to say is it's really frustrating. It really is a shell game. It's a now you see it and now you don't. And now you see that there's going to be this extensive development, but now we have to pretend we don't. So because that's not part of this decision-making process today. And it's something wrong with the process that forces us to look only in the short term at things that are going to have a long-term impact. What we see today, looking at the now we don't side of it, is that we need to conserve our forest lands for forest use, recreation, the quality of the soil, the air, the water, the scenic views, many of those things that have been more poetically described. And we see that this F2 designation is appropriate. There's no reason for this parcel to be different than any of the other F2 lands around it. And certainly its proximity to the preserve, which you've heard a lot about, makes it even more valuable. We hear it's not suitable for foresting, but certainly it's been logged and the trees are coming back. It seems like it's pretty valuable for recreation, although certainly if it were my property, I wouldn't be excited about people coming across it and recreating on their own. Certainly, I understand that. Water quality is a huge one. You've heard a lot about that, and that's really important. But the thing that I'm not sure we've put enough emphasis on is this 58 acres is in the middle of Trout Creek Preserve over here and forest lands over there. And it's important not just on its own, but as a piece of parcel. It's a connectivity of wildlife and nature that's really important. And so when you start making those parcels smaller, or you put urban or even a few town, few houses in the middle of a set of parcels, you change the character entirely. So I think we really have to preserve this in the F2, FU designation. And we know that we don't want to initiate that development process. I hope that it really bothers me that we're being told that it's okay to make this process begin because of the value that's going to be delivered later, but we're not allowed to consider the fact that the value that's being delivered later is a trade-off that people are making that we're not getting good information about. So in any case, we in Olawa really believe this application does not qualify for a Goal 4 exception. And we'll speak at a later time about Goal 14. We believe it also doesn't qualify there. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Hi, my name is John Zandowski. I live at 1680 West Williamson Avenue, Sisters, Oregon. Since everybody's done everything, I'll try to make this sweet. And the question about the wildlife crossing, which I did not understand, I can verify that I live on Williamson facing this property, and wildlife has gone down 60, 70% since McKenzie Ridge and Village Cold Spring 2 was in. They do not come through there near like they used to. The other thing was, and all these new developments, the driveways are so small, people can't even park a full-size pickup without being on the sidewalk, if there is a sidewalk. And the third thing, which doesn't matter to you, when we had the thing about McKenzie Ridge, a paid consultant for the city tried to tell us how lucky we are to drive on narrow streets, because if they were wider, people would go faster. So that's just my biggest concern, just a rebuttal, that wildlife is not going to get better with this thing going. I got to sign in here.
For your comments.
Are there any other folks who would like to testify in person? Oh, okay. A few more.
Hi, my name is Peggy Tehan. I live at 510 North Kelly Street in Sisters, and I'm thankful for having this public hearing to attend today and for the opportunity to speak. My point was just to push back on page 39 of the applicant when you're talking about the land being purchased by the City of Sisters for the UGB. And I made the statement that very limited, that the properties identified with that have very limited exceptions. Those properties are located within previously approved and developed residential development. And none of those developed properties can reasonably accommodate the housing. And my husband and I currently, we own 30 acres that is adjoins the city limits, that is not developed and has no improvements on the property, and is currently identified in option 1 and 5 of the city's current UGB process. And I'm aware of also probably another 70 acres of property that is likewise not developed and is has no improvements, and again has been identified in option 1 and 5 of the city's UGB. Very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Paul Lipscomb, Lipscomb, and I live just outside of Sisters. The mailing address is P.O. Box 579, Sisters, Oregon, 97759. I'm going to be really brief because I submitted a letter to the county just this morning. But there is one thing that I want to talk about, and this really relates to the honesty of the proposal as proposed.
The subject property does include a portion of Lower Trout Creek, a perennial trout stream which should remain protected rather than exempted by an unwarranted exception to goals 4 and 5. This stream remains a perennial stream because it continues underground even if the surface area periodically goes dry, leaving an easily discerned, if temporarily dry, functioning stream bed. Please note that at page 18 and again at page 53, the staff report also refers to Trout Creek as a, quote, perennial stream, close quote, as it crosses the property, and that it contains potential wetlands adjacent to the Trout Creek corridor. The staff report also notes that the Deschutes County's comprehensive plan has inventoried Trout Creek as a Goal 5 stream subject to setback requirements and that it carries a wetland designation. Aerial photos of the subject property clearly show the outline of this cut-over property when compared to the abutting National Forest and the Trout Creek Conservation Area. Such selective logging under similar circumstances is sometimes referred to as a, quote, real estate cut, close quote, because the remaining timbered property is more commercially valuable for development than if the property had been clear cut. Notably, the property owners acknowledge that they have already stubbed the utilities from their existing adjacent subdivision to the subject property in preparation for urban development. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
All right, anyone else in person who would like to testify? Okay, looks like we'll move Hearings Officer Brooks into the Zoom testimony.
Okay, thank you.
So again, folks remotely, please use the raise hand feature on Zoom if you would like to testify. I'm not seeing any raised hands. We'll give it another couple seconds. Or if you're calling in, again, the raise hand is *9. Okay. All right, it doesn't appear there's any raised hands on Zoom. So now, again, those anyone neutral to the application who would like to testify. Okay, seeing none in person. Any on Zoom? Okay, no raised hands on Zoom. So that appears to conclude the public testimony portion. Hearings Officer Brooks.
Okay, we can have the applicant come back up for a rebuttal period.
Again, having me back. Yeah, I took a lot of notes, a lot of good comments, all of them respected. I think it'll be easier for me to respond during written closing argument. To most of them, I can organize it, be a little more efficient. I did want to reference just a couple of points. And the first is the comments. The only ones that really kind of stung a little bit were the dishonest allegations. My client feels very strongly that that's the opposite of what they did. So, there were a couple ways to go when you do an application like this. You can say, we just want it zoned to MUA and not mention anything. Not even mention your vision, not mention what you'd like to see happen in the future. And for a couple of reasons. One is out of respect for their neighbors and their community. That wasn't the choice my clients made. They wanted everybody to know what the vision was. Now, having said that, I want to reiterate that the vision, it's true. It's a vision. It may or may not come true. We're being totally honest. My client hopes it happens. They hope the property is rezoned. They hope the city evaluates it properly and agrees with them. But that's a city process, and there's no guarantees that that's going to happen. And so My client now, I think, feels like they're getting a little bit of backlash because they were so open and they did it out of respect to their neighbors to say, this is our request and this is kind of our vision. And so I think it's far from being dishonest. The second thing is we've never said there are no other properties available. We said what we focused on, these other RR10 exception areas have all these limitations. As part of whatever may happen at the city, they're going to have to look at all the property, right? And they're going to have to weigh the 30 acres that the T-Hands own and the other properties. And all we're saying is the vision that my client has is let's consider them all equally. That's all we want. But it comes after this process. And that gets back to really this, why I can see where people say, well, you're telling us that it's limited to this application and this standard and these criteria, but yet at the same token, we all know what's going to happen. We all know what you want to do. That's all true. Like I said, we want to do something. My client wants to see this vision at some point if they go through all the right steps. But we are bound today to stick to the criteria. That's what you said when we started, and that's what every hearings official says, and every board says, and every planning commission is we are limited by the structure of our system that this application has to be evaluated based on certain criteria. And the criteria, it may be relevant what the vision is, but it really isn't something that we can base the decision on today. So I wanted to point that out. The other comment I just heard from the gentleman is that my client stubbed the utilities planning this future development. My client stubbed the utilities from Mackenzie Meadows Village because the city requires that. It's the city's to and through policy, and it's not inconsistent with Bend, Redmond, every other jurisdiction in Central Oregon is when you develop property, you're required to stub to and through. Now, does that indicate that the city saw a potential in the future for something? Maybe, but it wasn't my client's decision to stub the utilities. It was really dictated through the development process. So with that, unless you have more questions, like I said, I'll condense these comments because a lot of them are the same. I think it could be a lot more efficient in writing rather than going through each person and talking about their individual comments. And so that's the way we'd like to proceed. And again, thank you. Thanks staff. Thank everybody who participated today. We've taken a lot of notes. Oh, my client, Mr. Willits, since it's his application, he does, I do want to mention this creek. Mr. Kohlberg lives on the property. When we were putting the application together, the creek is ephemeral. That's what we thought. It's there some years, it's not there some years. We didn't put it in there. As soon as we learned that it was designated something different, you've seen our material. We acknowledge the stream is there. It may not be there every year. It may be underground some of the time. What we've done is, like we've done throughout this whole thing, is if we get information that tells us we need to address something, we've addressed it. The creek needs to be protected, whether it's ephemeral, or what's the word they use, permanent or perennial. We're not saying it shouldn't be protected. We're just saying there's ways in the process to do that and allow reasonable development in the future. So, Mr. Willits?
Yes, I have a few closing comments. First of all, I'm going to turn my head here. I want to thank this group for your civility. I feel the negative energy, but I really appreciate the communication. I think it's the core of Sisters. It's what I love about our community. And then Doug, I want to thank you because you provided the only compliment today, and we needed one. Okay, thank you. All right. So I wanted to just reconfirm to this group, even though I'm looking at you, sir, we are currently 4 tax lots. One of those tax lots has been built out. Kurt Kahlberg and his family lived on that lot, raised horses and children there. But we have legal tax lots of records. We pay taxes every year on them. So I want people to understand this is not private land. This has been zoned residential probably well before I came to the community 30 years ago. Number 2 is we have always been and will continue to be stewards of the land. If you illegally walk our land, which I think hundreds do, you're going to find no dump sites. You're going to find no encampments. You're going to find a well picked up property, no debris on that property. And it's because we care for it. It was our land. Protect Trout Creek, and we intend to continue to protect Trout Creek under every and any circumstance. So I want the audience to be aware of that. Our three families have always done our best to support our community. And we have a balancing act. And that balancing act is nature versus the transformative nature of homeownership. And that's not a cheap line. We're not an equity company out of state building 300 apartment units in Sisters because it makes financial success. We've been part of this community. We've successfully delivered affordable housing. I suspect the most affordable housing of any development in the Sisters area. And we believe affordable housing is critically important to our school teachers, to our firefighters, to those people that bring fire protection to our police force. And we will continue to do that given the opportunity. We're not trying to bait and switch here. We are, I think a couple of people brought up, it's an arduous process. It's created by the county. We're part of that process. And that process as we go through square one before we go through square two. So I thank you for your time and thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Quebec, before you depart, you had requested that the record be left open. Did you have a suggested time frame for that?
I did. I know the statute requires 7 days. We've got a lot of comments. There's no 150-day clock running, so I would respectfully request a couple weeks for the first period.
Would it be consistent then to do like a 2-week, 1 week for the final legal argument?
That would be acceptable. I don't want to shortcut other people. I just think that first period, I see that with the information that's been presented last minute and my schedule, honestly, I've got another one of these tomorrow in the city. So I could use 2 weeks kind of to put it all together. But if 2 weeks for the rebuttal is what you feel is fair and reasonable, we'll go with that.
I always like the symmetry of the open session with the rebuttal. So whatever time period you want to request for that initial period, Mr. May.
I would request the 2 weeks then.
Okay. Thank you. I think we'll have staff give a few comments. Of course, if they say anything that the applicant needs to rebut, I'll give you that chance, but I don't know if that'll happen or not.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. King, I don't know if staff has closing comments. There sounded like one question about the procedural posture here and the planning commission's role in a plan amendment.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Hearings Officer Brooks. And I'll address the open record period process as well. Someone just asked that. But yeah, to answer the great question from a member of the public, the Deschutes County Procedure Ordinance sets the decision and process for these plan amendment zone changes. And I'm going to cite to that code section for folks if they wanted to reference it. But it's Title 22, Section 22.28.030. Essentially says that the hearings officer has the initial recommendation on a plan amendment zone change with a final decision by the Board of County Commissioners. And then jumping to title section 22.24.020, the hearings officer is listed as the first hearings body. And so the code, that's where we start. In instances, which this isn't the case for this application, but if there was a conflict of interest, then it jumps to the Planning Commission, who serves as the initial hearings body. So again, this process is codified in Deschutes County Code. So wanted to address that. And then I'm going to, unless there's any other comments from Hearings Officer Brooks, I'll get the open record discussion up here to show everyone.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have any additional comments or questions. So if you could walk through the dates for that 2 week, 1 week process.
Yeah. So yeah, I've got those dates here discussed. So again, the new evidence and testimony will be a 14-day period ending Monday, April 21st at 4 p.m. Again, that's new evidence and testimony submitted. It can be submitted by anyone regarding the application. The second 2-week period is a rebuttal to rebutting any evidence that's been submitted. Again, that's another 2-week period. So that ends Monday, May 5th at 4 p.m. And lastly, the applicant has the opportunity for a 7-day final legal argument. Again, that's the applicant only, which will conclude Monday, May 12th at 4 p.m. And so for folks that are wanting to submit information, we need to, again, receive all the evidence by 4 p.m. on the date of that deadline. And I'll post these dates on the project webpage as well, and if you didn't jot them down. As far as actually submitting of anything, again, all submittals should be directed to myself. They can be sent via email to my email address, hallie.king@deschutes.org. Just as a reminder, any Google Drive or shared cloud storage links, we aren't able to access those. So if you could attach your documents as a PDF or Word or photo, for example, that would be great. You're also welcome to drop off materials, printed materials in person at the Deschutes County Community Development Department at 117 Northwest Lafayette. We're open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And again, just a reminder on electronic submittals, if you are sending a large PDF or email, try to hit send at least 5 minutes before 4 p.m. because sometimes large files take a minute or two in the ether to get to us. So just make sure you're getting things a little bit earlier. And so I'm going to put those dates back on the screen for everyone to see. And that concludes kind of open record. Again, my email, you're welcome to email any questions.
And, I would like to just add, for the sake of anyone who is planning on submitting additional materials, the rebuttal period really does need to be information that rebuts issues that have already been raised. And although I know the applicant's attorney knows this, the final legal argument is just that, a final legal argument without any new evidence. But with that, I think we are done. We can go off the record. It is, we'll close the hearing. We'll leave the record open as described by Ms. King and the today at 3 and 4. Thank you.
Thank you, Hearings Officer Brooks.